Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the mornings. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, April 26th, 2021. All right, finally getting used to that, delivering that fairly smoothly. Time for New Year's, I guess. Just to get in there and screw that up. How was your weekend? We can tell that it was fantastic, I think, by the number of stories in the queue for today from Greg. He, I think at one point said 50 other stories in addition to the 20 or so that he sent along. I guess that gave us all the luxury, as usual, as I'm finding is usually the case under a normal president with at least average to above average aptitudes, that you're able to more or less shut off the news for the weekend if you want to. Lots to catch up on, some of which I voluntarily shut myself off from because I always do, and others of which I just happened to ignore because I was enjoying the blissful, peaceful silence of a weekend with a competent administration in place. I did not pay attention, as I usually do not, to the Oscars, but I understand there were some exciting outcomes there. But I'm more or less useless to you in analyzing, entertainment in general, but certainly the Oscar field. Though I did see that the best, so what's the category? Best short film, I guess what used to be just best short film, but now I guess they differentiate from animated films by saying best live action short film award goes to, or went to, the film Two Distant Strangers, which as I understand it, was directed by Trayvon. Is it Trayvon Free? Is that his actual name, or is that just his Twitter name that I know him by? Who comes to the entertainment world most famously, I guess, via the old Daily Show. The Daily Show really turning out some good people, just generally speaking. And who's a Twitter follower and friend and a good follow all by himself, obviously. I mean, he clearly has his finger on the pulse of what Americans are interested in, whether it's comedy or a serious look at police violence. But apparently a fantastic production there. I have not had a chance to see it. I say I haven't had a chance to see it. I mean, I haven't seen it. I mean, I didn't know anything about it until now, which is fine. You know, now's as good a time as any to tell me, like, hey, what happened during the year in film? I wasn't paying attention. I had plenty of chances to see it. I was locked in my house for a year, but so were you. Maybe you saw it. You can tell me all about it. And I guess now that it's become an Oscar winner, now do we get a crack at it? Like somebody makes it available to us on streaming, or was it always streaming? I don't know. I'll check it out. I don't follow the movie industry enough, but this one we'll make an exception for. One, because they won an Oscar. Two, because we kind of sort of like Twitter-ish know the person who did it, and that's pretty cool. And also important topic, obviously, and demonstrating it in award-winning fashion. So it's always good for films like that and to take on a political agenda and then win such the highest profile award there is, I guess, certainly for film anyway. And then everybody says, in the name of keeping up with the entertainment industry, I will now educate myself on this topic, inadvertently in some cases. So could be a huge step forward just on the subject itself, which I guess was the whole point. So congratulations to Trayvon for making his point, and well done at that. There's a lot more, of course, to round up. There's all sorts of insanity, as usual. I understand there's a story out of Arizona where the Republican Party of Arizona just simply won't take the hint at maybe, that is the hint from like mainstream America, that maybe it's time for the Republican Party, if it wants to survive, to kind of put the whole election conspiracy thing behind them. No, apparently that's not in the offing. They have, through what mechanism, I'm not entirely sure, but maybe we'll find out by exploring the articles about it, have taken possession of the voting machines and the ballots cast on Election Day. The AP story that I happen to have ready on it starts this way. Months after former President Donald Trump's election defeat, legislative Republicans in Arizona are challenging the outcome as they embark on an unprecedented effort to audit the results of the state's most populous county. So that's probably Maricopa County, right? Yes, it is. Interesting. The state Senate used its subpoena power to take possession of all 2.1 million ballots in Maricopa County and the machines that counted them, along with computer hard drives full of data. So they're going to conduct their own audit under Republican auspices, and it gets worse from there. We'll discuss it with Greg, I'm sure, in the next couple of minutes, or unless he decides to leave it to us. But this is the interesting part. They've handed the materials over to cyber ninjas, and that's not a joke. I mean, they're a joke, I guess, but they really did do that. This is I don't know what, a computer consultancy forensics team that has apparently, well, for one thing, they're Florida-based, so they're Florida men, and have no election experience whatsoever, have never audited an election, never dealt with an election, and the company is run, as it says here in the AP article, by a man who has, you'll never believe it, shared unfounded conspiracy theories claiming the official 2020 presidential election results are illegitimate. So it sounds like they have the outcome that they prefer there in Arizona. That will be an interesting situation when the state whose legislature they serve has certified a long time ago and legitimately Joe Biden as the winner of their electoral votes and their Senate seat question settled as well. And they are going to say, no, the state that we are the legislature for got it all wrong and something. And somebody cracking wise on Twitter says, yeah, they'll be counting the 2.1 million ballots and announce we found 3 million votes for Donald Trump. So looking forward to that one. That can only lead to good things for the Republican brand. Greg Dworkin is with us. This is among his 479 stories this weekend, I think. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. But, it gets even better.
Does it? I stopped too early. Cyber ninjas, I thought, would sum it up, but no.
Well, set aside for the fact that a judge said this is ridiculous, but we're not going to slow it down unless the Democrats come up with $1 million. And the Democrats didn't because they said it would only slow it down, and we're not going to waste the money on this stupid thing. So what happened is that when they impounded the ballots and decided to double check them and think Florida 2000, with people looking at the hanging chads and such, they mark up the ballots for parts they think are suspicious. The problem is the ballots are marked with blue or black pens, so they're under specific instructions that they made up at the last minute. So you could only use red pens. Otherwise, you can't tell what was the original ballot and what you just changed.
Oh, yes, right.
And they showed up with the wrong colored pens.
Oh, dear.
They didn't show up with red pens. They showed up with black pens or blue pens because they didn't read the regulations particularly well. So the whole thing was tainted because you're playing with the ballots. But wait, it gets even better. The New York Times version of it says the pro-Trump cable channel One American News Network has started a fundraiser to finance the venture and has been named one of the nonpartisan observers that will keep the audit on the straight and narrow, although I would add Democrats aren't allowed.
Well, they'll say
you can't get better
fair.
than that. Not only are we screwing it up, but we're going to have Putin look at it and see what's going on here.
Excellent.
And he'll be the nonpartisan arbiter because he's not even American.
Yeah. We might, they'll say, international observers.
It's One American News. Where do you think the money comes from?
Yeah, okay. I didn't even get to that part.
Dana Rohrabacher, ask him.
Sure. So this should be super fair, and it's going to be real interesting to see. I guess I'm mildly curious if I could just have it happen in a bubble, like that little sandbox that they let Dr. Strange work in. There.
Yeah, something like that.
I'd love to see the outcome.
The Arizona
but not for real.
Papers are saying this is ridiculous and we don't want to have anything to do with it. So understand that it is a partisan exercise.
Yeah.
Which originally started because there was so much pressure on the Republican legislature to prove that it was a legitimate count, and they figured when they started to toss this idea around, Let's just do this so that we'll assuage everybody's worry about what was going on. And it's morphed into, wait a minute, let's make it as partisan as possible.
Well, how
because
fun.
now they're in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Because
Well,
if they
damn
come
them.
up with the fact that it was okay, then their constituents are mad. And if they come up with the fact that it's not okay, their constituents are mad. So the only possible thing that this can do is feed into conspiracy theories. So why did they do this?
I don't know. Something to do before they get coronavirus because they won't get vaccinated.
Yeah, and of course, that's not even the big story that's going on around here.
No, it's not.
The big story going on around here is a global pandemic with India falling apart.
Right.
And by the way, it's also coming in on Biden's 100 days. So everybody released their polls on Sunday. So now every pundit in the world has something to say about Biden as compared to George Washington and Abraham Lincoln's polling.
Sure, why not?
Both sides.
It's not a bad comparison.
And he's popular, but how popular is he really? And, all the other stuff that pundits have to
talking about
themselves
Rushmore.
to say.
Time to start covering his face on mountains and seriously inquiring about it. Only to have Kristi Noem put the kibosh on the whole thing. But otherwise.
Right. So I'll
compare
contribute my 100-day thing.
Sure.
I think that in addition to some of the polling we'll go over, I think the proper question to ask is Biden a transformational president? And here's the arguments that he is at 100 days.
Really?
First,
okay.
The filibuster and court reform are now mainstream topics. I don't know whether they'll pass or they won't pass, and we'll change them or we won't change them, but it's perfectly mainstream to talk about both things now.
Yes. No, that was some hard work. I'm glad we got that done. Thanks for your help.
I'm glad we got that done. David started this years and years ago, so the fact that it's now mainstream, you can attest to this just about better than anybody on the planet. So, that's transformational.
And it was Earth Day recently.
Yeah.
So we were sure about that.
So which planet would you like to pick? Deficit peacocks are on the defensive. Mm-hmm. Right? That's transformational.
Yes. Yeah, that is. I didn't do that one.
Perhaps that's Joe McCarter, so give credit there.
Okay.
And with perhaps one of the biggest transformational things of all, with Afghanistan withdrawal, the foreign policy blob is for once stymied. That just never happens. You can't fight the blob.
No.
But he is.
All right.
He said, thank you very much. I'm not doing it that way.
Oh.
Right? He's also forced the GOP to say all the quiet stuff out loud now.
Yes, true.
That's different. And,
really
he's got his cleanup on aisle 4 infrastructure bill and is popular. And not only is it popular, but the ways that he wants to pay for it are popular. This, for example, is CBS News poll. Jesse Ferguson was tweeting around, how should Americans pay for infrastructure? The Democratic agenda, people making $400,000 a year or more, tax them, 71% favor, 29% opposed. Large corporations, 71% favor, 29% opposed. The GOP alternative, fees on users of roads and bridges, a thing that Shelley Moore Caputo basically made up just to use as talking points because she didn't really have a plan. 42% favor, 58% opposed. So the infrastructure bill itself is popular. The elements in it are popular. How to pay for it is popular. And so, of course, Democrats in disarray.
All right. Well, if you don't really want to find out what's going on, you could always just run that headline and it works anytime.
Right, here's Axios' version. President Biden spent his first 100 days trying to engineer the end of the coronavirus and the start of a job boom.
Good idea.
And the next 100 are more audacious and risky. Re-engineer the very fundamentals of America: inequality, voting rights, and government's role in directing economic growth. You could argue that that's pretty transformational.
Yes, I would say so. More so than banning beef, anyway.
Oh, listen, you got to move to
I don't mean to rush
beef-based
you,
beer, because it's important to the growers in the Midwest.
Yeah, everybody had that one. I don't know. I'll give you the opportunity to shift to that now if you want to, but we'll get to it. I don't know how much we'll spend
on that, but Bill Scher was going to point out to the naysayers there. Next thing you know, you're going to discover that or claim that you can make wine out of fruit.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, right. Between that and the who said it was with the beer?
This whole thing started with a big lie.
Yes,
which was an article in one of the British papers about how Biden's going to ban meat. And then when Daniel Dale actually interviewed the author, he said, I don't know anything about Biden's plan.
Yeah, I've got a background.
It was sort of a speculative kind of piece here. But I don't know anything about his plans to have us eat.
Yeah.
Or eat us. I don't know. Could be Soylent Green for all I know.
Might work. Yeah, I guess essentially the 10-second version of it is that some environmental group put out a plan somewhere that said, well, if you really wanted to reduce emissions, and greenhouse gases, et cetera, you would look at cattle and agriculture, and ideally, everybody would limit their beef consumption, and that would bring down greenhouse gases. And Biden didn't say anything or do anything or endorse anything having to do with it. And the Daily Mail, which we're always warned off about every time they come up, says, I don't know. So they published this piece that said, no, Biden plans it, and you're only going to get 4 pounds of meat a year and something. And so conservative America spent the week on meat memes. And then I think Larry Kudlow, I guess it was, now I see that flash by, said...
Yeah, Biden's Green New Deal means no meat for the 4th of July. Now, it's not Biden's Green New Deal. The Green New Deal doesn't say that. And so it's all nonsense. Daniel Dale wrote, the stuff is completely imaginary. Biden has not proposed any limit on Americans' meat consumption. What happened is the Daily Mail ran an article that dishonestly connected Biden's climate plan with a not all about Biden study, and others on the right ran with this. And then Daniel Dale contacted the author, and the author said, I don't know anything about it.
All right. So
now Republican governors are taking a stand against the Biden policy that doesn't exist. So Greg Abbott says it's not going to happen in Texas.
That's true.
And Idaho has a beef with this agenda.
Yeah.
And, it's stupid stuff. So Jonathan Bernstein, the political scientist, was saying, alas for America, when this stuff actually, is what Republicans want to talk about instead of actual policy. Yeah. And Biden's trying to stop the pandemic and has an infrastructure plan. They're in a bad shape. They're in a bad place.
So the meat and Mr. Potato Head agenda.
Pretty much. That's what this is.
I guess that's
so. It's all nonsense trying to distract you.
Yeah. Kudlow's thing, I guess, to make it, hit home and be a kitchen table issue was to say, well, everyone will be forced to drink plant-based beer because Americans love beer.
Here's the real transformational part of Joe Biden's agenda, and this comes from the 100-day look. Yeah. And this is a NBC News piece because they had their own poll over the weekend. At 100 days, Biden's approval remains strong. Can the honeymoon last? Of course, you have to ask that. Majorities approve of the president's handling of the pandemic and the economy in a new NBC News poll, but strong divisions remain. Duh. But the best part is quoting a guy, Monica Alba does this in a tweet from NBC News. I don't have to think about what Joe Biden is doing every day, said a North Carolina man who voted for Biden. The best thing about Joe Biden is I don't have to think about Joe Biden.
Right.
And, of course, the Republicans are trying to make people like him think about Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And they're just tuning it out. And you wonder why people mid-election don't pay attention to politics. Well, that's because it's stupid. Our politics are like third-grade playground stuff.
Imagine
you don't pay attention.
Yeah, imagine you finally take everyone's advice and tune into politics, and it's Mr. Potato Head, Dr. Seuss, and fake meat things, and, oh, my God, plant-based beer, and you think about what goes in beer and say, I think I'm getting out of this politics thing. I was better off not paying attention.
Yeah, instead you can do the the Oscars or something like that. So let's go to 538.
All right.
Let's go to go-to-site polling now that we don't use Real Clear Politics anymore, because who would? How popular or unpopular is Joe Biden? And if you look at his numbers, these are the polls that came out over the weekend and thereabouts. Gallup, start with there. Approve, 57. Fox News, 54. ABC, Washington Post, 52. Rasmussen, 52. Morning Consult, 58. Ipsos, 54. And YouGov, 58. So on average there, if you take everything together with their secret sauce that sort of adjusts the polls, they got 54.5 approve and 40.6 disapprove. Now, people will note it's way better than the former guy. Not as good as John F. Kennedy.
Right.
But in this partisan era, these are fantastic numbers.
Okay. I mean, yeah, they're pretty good. We should be happy with them, I'm sure. If you ask Joe Biden, he'll say, sure, sounds great.
Right. Now, the polls tells us other things, too. This is a Washington Post poll looking at the vaccines. The number of Americans who say they won't get vaccinated has dropped by 25% since January.
Oh. Right.
Reduction is even higher. This is the won't get vaccinated dropping. Reduction is even higher among the definitely won't crowd. We have more work to do, but as more people get vaccinated, comfort and acceptance are increasing. So this is one of those cultural things where everybody's getting vaccinated and everybody's coming on board. So there will be
It's the
holdouts.
hot new thing.
In fact, I don't have this in front of me, but I certainly can find the reference. Kaiser Family Foundation poll has been looking at this, and the hardcore don't touch me is 15%. It's been 15% all along. It hasn't budged. That's not unusual. So we're talking about 60% or 65% say yeah, or at least I would like to as soon as it's available. Okay. And another 20% who you might label as the vaccine hesitant, all sorts of different reasons, from not being able to get it to my pharmacy screwed up on my appointment. And that 20% are the people we're fighting over. And then there's 15% who you're not going to touch. Sure. And one of the pollsters was saying, you could look at this the way we look at politics.
Why not?
Trying to get the 15% who don't want to be vaccinated no matter what is like trying to, talk to Trump voters to convince them. These are MAGA voters. You're not going to convince them.
Right.
These may be the white evangelicals. These may be the culturally conservative. I'm afraid that there's fetal parts and abortion stuff in the vaccine. Yeah. You're not going to be able to convince them. Don't try. Waste the time. What you're trying to do is deal with the persuadables. That's the 20%. That's who you're after, not the 15. And, of course, the 60, 65, you're trying to shore that up. Yeah. So, don't approach it as you have to convince everybody. You don't. But you do have to spend a lot of time on that 20%, and there's various and sundry reasons. For example, my physician friend, Jorge Caballero, who follows this stuff, says in a CBS News poll, it confirms what I've been saying for weeks. He says Hispanic individuals are least likely to be vaccinated, but also the least hesitant group.
Well, okay, then we ought to.
That means they can't get it, not that they don't want to get it. This is the problem with having rural areas, for example, in Texas, not having available vaccine. That's where the J&J stuff was supposed to come in. And all of that comes as the Washington Post publishes this vaccine study. The public's concerns over the J&J coronavirus are widespread, post-ABC poll finds. Fewer than 1 in 4 Americans not yet immunized say they'd be willing to get the vaccine made by J&J. There's broad mistrust of the shot safety after federal health officials paused its use. Now, this poll wasn't taken after the Fed said, okay, we looked at it and it's okay. It also incorporates, whether it says so or not, stories about J&J's 15 million doses thrown out because they did it wrong. This other factory had problems with mold and paint chips and other stuff. There's a lot of questions about J&J. And it's not just the clot issue. But that's okay because it didn't affect the others. The other two coronavirus vaccines authorized for emergency use, Moderna and Pfizer, elicit significantly greater public confidence. And we have enough of those. More than 7 in 10 people say they regard each of those to be very or somewhat safe. So what happened with J&J did not affect people's views of the other vaccines, which we already knew from other polls. So everybody's saying, oh, my God, this is a complete disaster 5 minutes after the announcement came out. We're wrong. All those hot takes were wrong. We said that all last week. We were trying to explain why that was. And the fact is, the public took all of this in stride, and they didn't look at it the way the Advisory Committee of Immunization Practices did, ACIP, with a risk-benefit, this, that, and everything else. They made the same sort of on-the-fly risk-benefits that every mom makes when she looks out the window, it's snowing, and decides whether to take the kids to school. People do this all the time, and they just don't think of it that way. And they made their decision. They're not that interested in J&J. Some are. Let them get it if they want it. But everybody else is going to get one of the others, and we're going to have enough of those. And that being the case, there's really no reason why we can't be sending these AstraZeneca stuff that we are never going to use. It doesn't even have an emergency use authorization, a EUA. We're not going to use them. We got 30 million doses. Send them to India. So a lot of pressure on the Biden administration to do this. Now, you found some information over the weekend about some of the contracts that had originally been signed with some of these companies, basically prohibiting sending them abroad. Yet Moderna, for example, over the weekend released a statement saying that there were no intellectual property matters that should be an issue. While the pandemic continues, Moderna will not enforce COVID vaccine-related patents against those making vaccines intended to combat the pandemic. And further, To eliminate any perceived IP barriers to vaccine development during the pandemic, upon request, we're willing to license our intellectual property for COVID-19 vaccines to others for the post-pandemic period. Okay. So let other countries use it, in other words. Pfizer hasn't done that yet, but I'm sure they will under that kind of pressure. And the point there is that there were barriers to sending stuff overseas, but they are eroding with the need. And our national security people and State Department spoke with their national security people. And last night, the Biden administration announced we're sending money, we're sending supplies, and European countries are doing that as well. The UN has called for this. India is in a really, really bad way. Yeah. And so for that reason, we're getting on board, and hopefully we'll see an announcement to send these vaccines there soon, which Tony Fauci alluded to over the weekend on the Sunday shows, but says, I can't tell you that we're going to do this because I don't make policy, but it seems to me like this is going to happen.
Yeah, well, I would think so. I think also, I mean, a lot of people have been very active in talking about it and tweeting about it and everything, and sometimes you maybe wonder whether there's any good that comes of it, but I think so.
Look what happened with the border stuff, in terms of putting pressure on Biden to deal with the immigration caps.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great look. It's not real
life. They respond to
but,
pressure.
Yes,
I want to do it. Now make me. Okay, we will.
Yeah, and I think this was probably one other example of it. I did find out a little bit about the contracts, although there's still lots of questions about exactly what's in there and was that necessary, et cetera. But I did get to thinking, if there was an advantage to Trump to break contracts that had been left to him by a previous administration, he would have done it in the drop of a hat. So, might as well start thinking about it now. I did find some other things that could stand in the way, but I think a concerted effort under pressure by the Biden administration could see some of this stuff shipped and shipped soon. Hope so. Hope it happens in the next 2 minutes, and we can tell you about it when we come back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We were solving the world's pandemic problem when we left. Have we done it?
Well, maybe you'll talk a little bit about the contracts and what you found. I'm going to go back to David Lauder in the LA Times writing up Biden's 100 days. And again, you have to realize, why are we talking about 100 days? It's not 100 days yet. Well, that's because everybody released their media polls on Sunday, and so now you have to talk about it because we have to promote our poll. So in the first 100 days, David Lauder writes in the LA Times, Uncle Joe Biden, that's in the headline, Uncle Joe Biden combines progressive goals in a reassuring manner.
Sure.
The blank spots are filling in. The resulting image is one most observers did not expect based on Biden's largely centrist 4-decade record. A couple of months before the election, did I think he'd be a transformational president, said Cornell Belcher? I would have laughed at that idea, and I would have been mistaken.
They did. I mean, we've said this before, that all the talk was, maybe he's even just a one-term caretaker and Kamala Harris is next. It's just a transition to her. It's transformational, but...
Meanwhile, the LA Times also had a very interesting article on this all in the Pundit Roundup. Michigan's outbreak has scientists worried COVID skeptics will keep the pandemic rolling.
Yes.
So I had observed that the problem with Michigan and the reason they're having such a big spike is a combination of the worst possible things. A large number of variants, which are more transmissible, and a Republican legislature that's kneecapped the public health powers of the governor. And I got a lot of pushback on Twitter. Oh, you're making stuff up. You're just a Democrat, yada, yada, yada. And I pointed to a Becker's Hospital study noting that point about the the opening up issues with Michigan, and this LA Times says exactly that. The nation's watching. The state tops the nation by far in the rate of new COVID-19 cases, a sharp upward trajectory that's got more than 24 hospitals in the state nearing 90% capacity. And when Catherine Watkins goes shopping these days, she doesn't bring her 3 children. There are just too many people not wearing masks in her southern Michigan town of Hillsdale. Mm-hmm. At some stores, not even the employees are wearing them anymore. 30% of shoppers, she estimates, wear masks, down from around 70% earlier in the pandemic. It's a complete disregard for the very real fact they could wind up infecting somebody. So there's a real culture clash in Michigan over this. People have really taken sides more perhaps than anywhere else. And so you have that culture leading to increases in Michigan, again, not because of what the legislator does, but because of what people do. Whereas in Texas and Florida, they're also having upticks, but nowhere near what's going on elsewhere. And at the same time, there are states that are really doing very, very well, including Connecticut and other states like New Hampshire. So we have our continued 50 different pandemics adding up to a curve that's basically flat. There is some progress. It's not getting worse, which is wonderful. It's not getting better as fast as we would like. And I think the whole debate about, maybe Florida and Texas did it right is kind of stupid because New Zealand did it right. We had the opportunity to be New Zealand and we blew it. And that also builds in and accepts that 560,000 deaths were inevitable and there was nothing we could do about it, which just isn't true.
Yes. By the way, yeah. So we are 586,000 deaths, just to keep us up to date. And thanks to Peter Manso, who, like me, was counting off every time we got a new number, what that would be equivalent to in terms of wiping out American cities. And he had to update his thread, and I saw his last night. We're now talking about states. We have passed Wyoming's population. So we're now at the point where the COVID dead are the equivalent of Trump's ignorance and malfeasance, wiping out the entire state of Wyoming, which has been in the news lately, not just because of Lynn Cheney's representation of it, but, for one thing, another South Carolinian, Nancy Mace's unfortunate comments in opposing D.C. statehood, saying that they didn't have enough people to be a real state, while she was standing right next to Liz Cheney, whose state has fewer than that. But
right.
Now they're all gone.
So basically, since it's approximately the same size, that means Boston should have 2 more senators.
Or another way of looking at it is so many people have been killed by Trump's pandemic that they were at one point entitled to 2 senators and a seat in the House.
Mm. So, of course, one of those seats would be vacant because somebody died from COVID.
Right.
So the New York Times had a piece, How COVID Upended a Century of Patterns in U.S. Deaths, talking about how the excess deaths are just phenomenal percentage-wise.
Yes.
And we've talked about this on the show, a bit misleading because the population size is different, but we're talking about 1918 numbers, and there's the graph that goes with it, and you could see that the number of excess deaths are phenomenal and just stands out right away in terms of looking at the picture in the United States. The excess deaths are a huge spike compared to previous years, and that's compared to recent years, just before it, where the excess deaths were, if anything, down a little bit.
Yeah.
So, the pandemic is real, the deaths are real, the bad steps that people took that didn't help combat it are real, but they don't want to take accountability for it, and therefore they have to minimize it. And that's part of the reason behind, no matter what happened, Trump and Abbott and DeSantis in Florida and Noem, they all did the right thing because they're our side. Mm. Because to say otherwise would mean to credit the other side, and we're not going to do that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at this. This is some chart. It's very stark. And, I guess that reminds me of the other weird measure I was using, is that we are also fast approaching, probably inside of this week, going to pass the total number of U.S. service personnel lost in combat in every war the United States ever fought from Lexington and Concord forward. Just throw that one out there for you.
Right.
But all in a year.
There's that. Now, again, other things are going on besides those stories. You talked about the Arizona one. The census is going to release the first results, I think, today in a press conference from the 2020 tally.
Okay.
So we'll get state population counts. And the counts, of course, are used to determine the Electoral College and House seats.
Yes.
So NPR has a story about that, and that's something to watch for. But perhaps we'll have more to say about it tomorrow for you, or Wednesday for me.
500,000 other people
but
in
that's
it
happening,
died.
you know.
Yeah. Right. Did they adjust it for coronavirus at all? I mean, it's a whole congressional district died.
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay.
So there is, that's about pretty much the summary of the stuff I really wanted to get in. Oh, one more.
Yes.
The Republicans meet, says Washington Post Power Up. Republicans meet to plot future with Trump still dividing them. So they're supposed to have a 3-day policy retreat.
Another one.
Yes, and if you go there, according to Jake Sherman, if you want to get on their Wi-Fi, the password is Biden border crisis.
It's too long.
Yeah, it's too long, so, whatever. But I don't even know if it is, but they wanted everybody to know that that's what it is.
Yes, they like to play games with that every... I mean, if you're giving out the password, I think that sort of...
So the problem is you're going to have Liz Cheney and Kevin McCarthy sit down and try to plan a policy future with or without Trump, who isn't there, but Romney, Daniel McBean is there.
Okay.
And, other acolytes for Trump are there.
Mm-hmm.
And as New York Times' Robert Draper puts it, twice in a row, Trump lost the popular vote by significant margins, sources familiar with Cheney's views say, exacerbating a worrisome trend for Republicans that extended across 5 of the last 6 presidential elections, Draper reports. Given all this, Trump's conduct in egging on the rioters presented his party with political opportunity. By impeaching him, they could wash their hands of Trump and then resume the challenge of winning back majorities in the voting public. That's the way Liz Cheney was looking at it. Okay, Sarah Sanders is going to be there, in addition to Ronna McDaniel.
Awesome.
And Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to be there. And Kevin McCarthy says, I've kept the noisiest parts of the party under control. Of course, he wasn't the one that took her off committees. Democrats did.
Right. And it's only made her noisier, I guess. But
right. McCarthy claimed on Sunday he stopped loud voices in the party when they've gotten too extreme.
What?
Well, he's a liar.
Oh.
I mean, you have to understand, everything about the Republican Party is a lie. Everything.
I guess so.
The smallest to the biggest. Whether it's the
like
password to get on the Wi-Fi, or whether the election was stolen, to whether or not Arizona should do a audit under circumstances that are completely and totally partisan. Everything that they are doing is based on a lie. And, eventually they're going to get their 15%, the same 15% that will never vaccinate.
Yeah,
but, the question is going to be, what about everybody else?
I don't know. They too might be too ill to vote. That will be interesting too, by the way, if everybody who refused to get the vaccination was too sick to go vote in person, but drop boxes had been outlawed.
Right. So Kevin Collins was the guy I was thinking of. I found that because I had put it in the pundit roundup. The science of campaigning has gotten some attention over the past several cycles. So the lessons of this data-driven campaigning are some useful insights into other areas like increasing COVID vaccination. No, I'm not an epidemiologist, but hear me out, he says. Mm-hmm. You don't need to win every vote. You need to get a majority of votes. And we don't need to get everybody vaccinated. We need to get the herd immunity.
Yes,
or as we like to call it, community immunity.
Oh, that's nice.
Right?
As I like to call it,
I'll leave epidemiologists to say what that is, but my understanding is it's like 80 to 90%. Probably 80% or more.
Well, jeez.
We don't know for sure. But that means you don't need to develop interventions to go after the most intransigent anti-vaxxers. You need to develop interventions to persuade the people who are on the margin.
Yeah.
They cite Kaiser Family Foundation polling. And let me just give you that whole thread. It is in the pundit roundup, but this makes it easier for you to find.
All discuss starting them from helicopters?
50% 13 to 15% has been pretty stable across survey waves, dating back to December 2020 through March 2021. Already gotten is up to 32. It used to be non-existent, of course. In January, it was 6. As soon as possible, another 30. So that's 62% right there you already have. Wait and see has dropped from 39% in December 2020 to 17% now.
Okay. Then I assume that means that they're no longer waiting.
Yeah, they've already decided.
As opposed to, well, now I know.
They either got it or they already decided.
Okay.
And in fact, the only if required group is about 7 to 9%, and sometimes it is required, like if you want to get on an airplane and go overseas. Only if required, 7 to 9%, and then definitely not between 13 to 15% completely rock stable. So what he's saying is ignore the 13 to 15%, pay attention to everybody else, which is to say, he says, collectively should not be focused on interventions to persuade that group. They're the hardest to persuade, and we don't really need them. So 2 decades of studies on Get Out the Vote has shown that the way to get people to vote isn't to try to increase their motivation. It's to decrease the barriers. Which is why the whole thing about getting rid of drop boxes, getting rid of Sunday voting if you can, getting rid of early voting. That's why the GOP is doing these things. They're trying to erect barriers.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So we'll try to tear down.
And to increase the sense that getting vaccinated, he meant, is descriptively normative. Yeah. Applying that to vaccination, the key is to make getting vaccinated as easy as possible. That means there should be a website you can get on and click and make your appointment. You can do that through the CDC if you wish, but states have made it varying easy to hard. And increasing the perception of unvaccinated people that getting vaccinated is completely normal, particularly among people like them. And that's why it's important to have, I'm just an every ordinary Joe. Everybody's named Joe where I am. Beer. And, it's like in Blazing Saddles, everybody's named Johnson. And I'm getting vaccinated.
Right. Well.
And so, that's important to do.
Krispy Kreme.
Which is starting to happen. Governor Larry Hogan in Maryland has blamed low vaccination rates in MD's Black and Latino communities on vaccine hesitancy. But we just talked about the fact that they're not that hesitant. It's barriers.
So
they had a terrible distribution system in Maryland. It required people seeking vaccination to call up multiple different pharmacy and hospital systems to see if you could find an appointment. So they weren't getting vaccinated. That's a barrier. It's not intent. And so it's really, really important to focus on that and then get back and realize that with voting, that's exactly what they're doing. They're working on barriers.
I guess you couldn't make it any clearer. I mean, to hear that that's the problem that they're having in Maryland, living this close to Maryland, seems so ridiculous. That it's a very dependably Democratic state that has this weird habit of occasionally electing Republican governors. And
which has
now
consequences.
Look what you've done. Yeah, I mean, right across the border here, we often elect Republicans. We elected a Democrat who is a doctor, and we had a centralized database to sign up online in January, and they called us and said, come in for a vaccine.
Right. When persuading people, Kevin Collins writes, to vote for a candidate or get vaccinated, we need to not focus on reasons that are persuasive to the people who are already supporting the candidate, but which are supportive to the persuasion audience. Now, that sounds so obvious as to be almost tautological, but I assure you, he says, even politically sophisticated people make this mistake all the time. I know this because I argue with people all the time about this. Don't tell me the message you like. Tell me the message that gets the guy who wasn't sure he was going to vote or vote for me to like. That's way more important. I already have you.
Yes.
If you don't think my message is perfect and you're going to vote for me anyway, who cares?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to say that to you directly, but maybe I should because you're being such a jerk about it. But make the message for the people who haven't decided yet. Duh.
Yeah.
Why do you do that? Because you get more votes that way.
Right. I guess there's always the rear guard action.
I'm just trying to get people to vote for our side.
Yeah. And then I'll become transformational after that.
But you're not pure. I just am trying to get people to vote for our side. This isn't hard unless you make it hard.
It's true. We do have this tension all the time, and people say, "But you got to keep the base excited." Yeah. I have other people to do that.
It's everybody else. So That's
no point in
how
being
you
a
have to look at the
transformational
vaccine stuff,
candidate.
right?
Yes,
I mean,
yeah.
you need regular people to talk to the regular people who haven't decided yet. But more importantly, you have to lower the barriers.
Yes.
Make Maryland's system like Virginia's, the way David described. That's way more important than a celebrity, I got my shot, although that's important.
Yes. I should say,
more
I don't know
important
how
is,
we're doing with
you
the
know,
minorities
put
here,
put the vaccines in dollar stores, barber shops, the American Museum of Natural History, under the whale. I mean, whatever it is that floats your boat, go do it there.
Yes. I don't know why.
NASCAR should do it.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. NASCAR should just spray it over the crowd with a crop duster.
Come watch races. Free vaccine.
Yeah. I mean, they really should be doing that. And I guess that's small scale, what Krispy Kreme was interested in doing. And then, of course, people came and said, well, there's too many calories and carbohydrates in what you're doing. Okay, I mean, yeah. But if people were going to get excited about the donuts and get the vaccine, then why not?
Why not? What do you care?
By the way, they were going to eat the donuts anyway. They were going to eat the donuts and have coronavirus. Now we can just at least treat them for the diabetes, which is controllable.
So, do what works.
Okay. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's what they should be doing. Actually, I've been thinking about where are the people who, I mean, it's not like they're lazing about doing nothing, I'm sure. I haven't read about them recently, but remembering the old remote area medical clinics that they did. Seems like you're talking about the same demographic in many ways, about the people who have, in some cases, hesitancy, in some cases, politically motivated hesitancy, but certainly access problems. I guess, the pandemic probably has curtailed their activity because it involved crowding large numbers of people together, many of whom have had no access to health care. Probably wasn't a great idea. But now, as a vaccine clinic, I wonder, a vaccinated core of medical volunteers, I guess it's time to reopen the Wise County Fairgrounds and put the word out. However they got to those people the last time about free health care, free vaccine might have them come in.
Right, have it
and have your
booth
dentist
at the Iowa
taken care
State
of
Fair.
too.
By the way, one of my medical friends from Iowa writes, so what's the over-under on the Iowa legislature passing a bill forcing us to drink meat-based beer?
With ethanol in it.
With ethanol, right, something like that. With additives.
That could probably get that passed. Can you deep fry the vaccine in any way at all? I know I have to usually keep it cold, but if there's any way to put it in batter and fry it, state fairs would be a great vector.
Right.
As you mentioned.
So that's the story. And that's all I got for today.
Okay.
I'll see you on Wednesday.
Couldn't possibly be anything more.
What are you going to talk about?
That was it. So I'll probably go to the Oscars now.
Close up shot. Yep.
Okay. Very good. Thanks.
We'll do that. We'll do
Greg.
the Oscars in NASCAR.
Yeah.
Me a favor.
Right. Come to the Oscars and we'll give you a vaccine. Well, that's probably coming.
Don't come to the Oscars and we'll give you a vaccine.
That would be much better. Yes.
We're offering a vaccine for everybody who didn't watch the Oscars yesterday.
That would work. And they could put it in the gift bags, but I guess probably also all the celebrities are vaccinated.
And wait. There's
they don't need anything else.
It's free for anybody who didn't watch Game of Thrones.
Oh, well. That's a narrow slice.
Well,
but
you got to go where the people are.
They're hesitant, right? Exactly. I could believe that. Well, all right, we'll come up with more interesting possibilities.
Sure, we can offer a vaccine for everybody who didn't like Sharknado. I mean, it's
Shark Tank.
Possibilities are endless here, and you got to go where the people are.
Yeah, I guess that's true. That reminded me that one of the things that I was thinking about when I saw those crazy contracts restricting, I thought the language was restricting, you had to use the vaccines that we contracted for under Operation Warp Speed, which we had difficulty with before anyway. But you have to use them in the United States. That was the idea. And as it turns out, that was because something the manufacturers were interested in, because they had also already won liability protections if anyone were to become ill from the vaccine or claim to have become ill from the vaccine, they would
But
be
nobody
protected
has
from
those
liability.
overseas, so I don't understand.
Right. There's that for one thing. But I guess they asked for that protection, and so they said, well, if you then give the vaccine to people outside of the United States, the liability protection wouldn't apply. In Ceylon, I don't know, just to pick some random name that they don't even use anymore. But overseas, anywhere, they don't care that in the United States, Pfizer is protected from liability. It's not the case in their country. So you can see kind of where the concern came from. But yeah, trying to brainstorm ideas now, like, well, if it says you can't give the vaccine outside of the United States or its territories, and I'm starting to think, can we give vaccinations at U.S. embassies and consulates, which are supposedly U.S. territory for international purposes of international law? And I guess it would be great PR, although then I worry that somebody would bomb a vaccine clinic. But maybe we need to establish some sort of network of temporary consulates. India can grant us 100 temporary consulates that for this week are U.S. territory. Come and get your vaccine. Trying to work
it's a possibility,
around.
You got to be creative here. See, the whole point there is, where there's a will, there's a way. And once upon a time, a decade ago,
yes,
now more than a decade ago, when I was trying to work with CDC about pandemic flu preparations,
yes,
you really had a flavor of how slow the blob was. Not the foreign policy blob, but the regulatory public health blob. We had a wiki called FluWiki that had up-to-date information that they used to use and liked because we could update it daily, hourly, whatever. And I met with them about them doing something similar, and they said, we love yours. The problem with us doing it is every single thing we do has to go through committee, and so we can update maybe once every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And the wording has to be right, and it's got to pass this, and it's got to pass that. And we just are not flexible. We can't. And we hate it, but it's the way it is.
It creates
some
problems.
When you think about that, and then you look and see some of the things, the changes we were talking about putting pressure on the Biden administration, some of the changes they made are lightning fast for them.
Yeah.
Even though we think it's too slow. We brought this up on Monday, and you didn't change policy till Thursday.
Yeah.
My God, what took you 3 days?
Right.
And I'm thinking this usually takes 6 months.
Right. And as much of a headache as all of it is, it also has a lot to do with the accountability that we originally attempted to build into the system. If you just change at the drop of a hat and then something goes wrong, well, who authorized this change? You know what? I don't know. We didn't keep records. We were moving too fast. Okay. Well, if you got to go through a regulatory regime where everybody has to sign in triplicate, now at least you know where that happened. Or, for instance, we made the decision to distribute this thing and something went wrong or nothing went wrong, whatever. And the newspaper said, we'd like to know all about it. Tell us all the information you have about it so we can write about your fantastic decision for our readers. Gosh, I don't know. Some of it is confidential. All right, well, Freedom of Information Act. We request the information. All right, well, now 25 people are going to spend all day, every day for a week hunting through our records to answer that question. We want that transparency, but somebody was supposed to be given a vaccine is now searching emails for the New York Times so that they can write a story about the thing we did last week. Okay. I guess that's just the price of bureaucracy. Okay. I mean, in the end, maybe it's not so bad that we have these things. And especially if you have governmental actors who say, well, you know what? I'll tell you what. I can't do it, but I'll read your wiki and try and do the things that you recommend, and we'll do our best to emulate your faster style and more open style, but we still want to make sure that everybody has access to the information about what's going on inside government. There's pros and cons to everything.
Everything.
That was very centrist.
Alrighty, take care, and I'll see you around.
Okay, I think that's a wise thing to do. And by the way, a good centrist thing for you to do is take tomorrow off, but come back on Wednesday. Just sort of both
Center
sides.
of the week.
Yeah, right.
Can't be more centrist than Wednesday.
That's right. That's what makes it such a great day.
I'm just saying.
Fantastic.
All right, take care,
a little
and
more
I'll see you
Tuesday,
sometime.
but you're more Wednesday. Okay, great. Thanks, Greg. See you then. There's no more centrist and efficient position than that. I think that sums it up nicely. So the what I discovered over the weekend vis-a-vis these contracts was written up. I think I grabbed a Vanity Fair article because they were the first ones out of the box with, okay, we finally figured out what's going on here. I was thinking about it all week as I saw people complain about it being possibly an issue with the patents. And I thought, well, that seems waivable, but again, probably pretty slow and good reason for it. Well, understandable reason for it, if not necessarily good reason for it. But it feels like there was much more to it. So yeah, the Vanity Fair piece that I have here, I'll share it a little bit with you on the other side of our top of the hour 1 minute break. Catherine Eban, E-B-A-N, probably not E-Ban, but something close to it, in Vanity Fair. We are hoarding, and that's a little, in quotes there. We are hoarding, I got to read you all the punctuation. Why the U.S. still can't donate COVID-19 vaccines to countries in need. And I guess since we have a few seconds here before our music starts, we'll read you the subheader. Thanks to America First style contracts negotiated by the Trump administration, and an alarming uptick in domestic cases as well. Yes, the urgent work of planning to vaccinate the rest of the world is still in limbo. And it's not, you know what? I said they finally broke the story in a way that reached me. And the fact is that they broke the story much earlier, and I just wasn't looking because the dateline on this thing is April 6th. So a full 20 days ago, coming up on 3 weeks since they reported this. And we spent that 3 weeks insisting that the problem was something else. So I guess we all have an information flow problem. All right. See you in a minute. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Shall we dive in? I think so. This was kind of enlightening, and I guess it's equally enlightening that I find out it was written on April 6th. And again, I wasn't actively searching to find the reason. I really just sort of figured, quite honestly, bandwidth being what it is, somebody else would, somebody like Catherine Eban, would find out what the hell's going on here and why aren't we, because people have been asking, for instance, why we weren't shipping our AstraZeneca stockpile overseas for a long time. And I guess I kind of figured, well, that news will reach me eventually. Somebody will find out and write it up. But I guess it must have been more complicated than I thought. And now I see this piece and I think, that's clarifying, helpful. But yeah, it's not new. And I mean, we have to consider ourselves pretty up on the news here, right? It's the whole point of the show is we kind of gather the day's headlines and talk them out here. But somehow I missed this thing. We'll start out and just let Catherine's more organized thoughts tell the story. On the morning of March 31st, roughly 25 Biden administration officials, that's what it takes, gathered at the White House, double masked, by the way, for a meeting called on short notice by a member of the National Security Council. They were there, they believed, to debate how best to broaden the federal government's COVID-19 response beyond U.S. borders and reclaim America's traditional role as the world's public health leader. That's important. And, of course, that role very plainly and purposefully destroyed by Donald Trump. So it's a big part of the mission of the Biden administration, restore that. The challenges they planned to address were daunting. The Trump administration had poisoned relations with the rest of the world, first severing ties with the World Health Organization, and then politicizing the pandemic, referring to COVID-19 as the Wuhan virus, and even worse, Kung Flu, you remember that one. Into the vacuum rushed China and Russia, who began currying favor around the world by distributing their own vaccines of possibly dubious quality. So that seems somewhat worrisome. I am notified here by Greg that there's some late breaking news here. What's going on here? White House COVID response, Twitter telling us, should I open this thing up? Is that what I'm going to find here? Our National Supply Coordinator, Tim Manning, explains, says the White House, how we're using the Defense Production Act in our global COVID-19 response in this thread. Okay, so let's hang on to that and come back and visit it perhaps after we comb through what's in the Vanity Fair piece here. Although it feels like I should go to the White House before Vanity Fair, but I think Vanity Fair will help set us up, and a White House response would be helpful afterwards. So into the vacuum, right, rushed Russia and China putting out their own vaccines. I recall hearing about the Russian vaccine, and they were calling it Sputnik, and it was of the efficacy was in some doubt. Anyway, I mean, international relations being what it is, you can imagine that's just making things worse after all the damage that Trump inflicted. Inside the U.S., all eyes have been focused on the chaotic rollout of vaccinations, but if current trends continue, it will be months, if not weeks, before every adult who wants a shot is able to get one. Very soon, the U.S. will be in possession of a vast COVID vaccine surplus, and that, global health experts within the government agree, could quickly turn into a PR nightmare. That's the part we're all complaining about, rightly. And they see it, they saw it coming, they understood that it was happening, and they also understand that the wheels turn slowly, so they began trying to turn them some time ago. Can you imagine the condemnation of the world if America has vaccines sitting on warehouse shelves expiring while the rest of the world is dying? Said one senior government official with knowledge of the meeting. So, when could this have taken place, right? The dateline in this piece is April 6th, so you know that this conversation was taking place in March, which, is a good month ago at this point. Unfortunately, sending doses overseas is no simple matter. To even begin planning in earnest how to do so, an essential document entitled The Framework for International Access needed to be greenlit. That was a goal of several officials in attendance at the meeting at the White House at this point in April 6th, which was last Wednesday. So whatever the Wednesday prior to April 6th was, that's when the meeting went. Oh, she gave us the date right at the top, right? March 31st. So a lot of the people who showed up double masked at this meeting were there for the purpose of greenlighting this document, this framework for international access, so that the process could begin. But instead, those in attendance heard a stark and dismaying message. The pandemic was spiraling out of control here at home. There was no capacity to deal with global donations, meaning that planning would end up coming to a screeching halt, said the senior government official. We only thought we would have a surplus, or it was anticipated that we might have a surplus at some point. But for right now, we don't have that surplus, I guess, at this point, March 31st. Perhaps the situation is different now. And looking back, I don't feel like the reporting was that the pandemic was spiraling out of control on March 31st, on or about March 31st. But yeah, we had plateaued and we're seeing some return. We weren't continuing a downward trend towards another plateau at the time. So bad enough. I guess we got so used to when we were at peak disaster that the plateau we were at the end of March seemed like a huge improvement by comparison. But it was in fact still world leading in the number of daily cases and daily deaths. So, we weren't done. 2 days earlier, so again, late March, CDC Director Rochelle Walensky had veered off script in a press briefing to express her feeling of, quote, impending doom in the face of a deadly uptick in cases. Now, those gathered for the White House meeting discussed the alarming reversal of recent U.S. gains, driven in part by reckless reopenings and spring break travel, a surge of more infectious variants, a rising rate of hospitalizations for patients under 40, and a staggeringly high nationwide positivity rate of more than 13%. Roughly by the way, that struck me too, the nationwide positivity rate of more than 13%. And of course, the story is always local, but in order to get to a national positivity rate of more than 13%, you've got some really super high rates in some places. And I mean, I'm thinking back, I don't know if I remember correctly, but thinking back to the earlier, the very early days of the pandemic when schools were just closing and, various other things in various local, or under the control of local governments were closing, and they put out benchmarks and said, we'll consider reopening when we get the positivity rate down to X, Y, Z. And they set, decent goals given where we were. And I don't think we've ever reached those goals, and we've never even been close to reaching the positivity levels that were supposed to trigger reopening. And governments have long since abandoned any hope of getting to those levels under pressure to reopen. My recollection was that epidemiologists were saying, you want positivity rates down like under 5% before you consider reopening. And I guess they echoed that, and pretty soon they realized we're not going to reopen for like 2 years. And so they just, I don't know whether they raised the numbers or they just waived the whole thing and said, forget it. Nobody's paying attention to that. All they're paying attention to is our announcements are open or closed. So we might as well just open. But 13%, yeah, that would have been at the beginning of the pandemic when they were setting those numbers. That would have been like, yeah, you're closed for like 6 months. Don't call us. We'll call you. Anyway, roughly, so back to end of March, nationwide positivity rate of more than 13%. Roughly 2.9 million Americans were being vaccinated each day, and deaths had dipped below 900 per day, but every other indicator was bad. They're going into full hunker down mode to figure out what's going wrong, said this senior official. The domestic situation was so severe, and that's in quotes, so severe, said the official, that every federal entity that might work on overseas donations had instead been tasked with vaccinating more Americans. The rest of the world would have to wait. And as unfortunate as that is for the rest of the world, it's understandable that, the job of the United States government is going to be first and foremost getting the pandemic under control in the United States. To the extent they're able to do that, then they can turn their attention to the rest of the world. But it's the primary mission. And given, again, how slow things turn, even when they're moving at warp speed, a decision in late March to refocus on domestic issues is going to mean that the month of April is going to be spent in frustration for anybody whose primary concern is turning on a dime now that we've perhaps addressed the domestic issues and distributing the vaccine internationally. It doesn't happen that way. For all the well-documented failures of its pandemic response, the Trump administration exceeded expectations when it came to developing COVID-19 vaccines. Thanks in part to Operation Warp Speed, the name of which was perhaps dubious, but the results of which, I guess, are viewed more positively. The multi-billion-dollar joint venture of the Pentagon, the Department of Health and Human Services, and private pharmaceutical companies, a handful of manufacturers were able to gain approval for new vaccines in record time, accomplishing in under a year what might normally have taken a decade. And by the way, big side conversation I see going on all over the place. Well, why won't people give Trump more credit for Operation Warp Speed? I see a couple of journalists out there insisting that this needs to be done. And I guess I'm just telling you, here's another journalist I'm reading in Vanity Fair that says, for all the well-documented failures of its pandemic response, the Trump administration exceeded expectations when it came to developing vaccines. And I think that's largely true. Although, there's always a lot of nuance to this too. It's true that they were able to gain approval for new vaccines in record time, accomplishing in under a year what might normally have been a decade. That's true. Lots of bureaucracy moved out of the way or moved to operate a lot quicker than normal. Although we did have a huge head start, at least in the development of the mRNA vaccines, thanks to the work of scientists who were fairly sure that this was going to be useful technology for vaccines of some kind for many years, and who, by the way, were largely discouraged at every turn by everybody else in the field, saying, this is ridiculous and you're wasting your time. But they persisted in their work. And then it was ready and on the shelf when the government said, well, we'll move bureaucracy aside. You just got to give us the actual medicine. Well, it's great that they were able to speed up the approval process, but the medicine was the chief part of it, and that part was actually already done. But okay. Anyway, still, given the nature of the Trump administration, this signal accomplishment came with some substantial asterisks. We discussed some of them, but here's the rest of them. Upon taking office, the Biden team discovered that the previous administration's plans for the distribution of vaccines to individual citizens was woefully inadequate. I guess which results in things like people who live, miles perhaps apart as the crow flies in between Virginia and Maryland are finding that under a Democratic administration in Virginia, you register and they say, we'll call you when we got vaccine for you. And they do, which is amazing. And over on the other side in Maryland, which, by the way, in this area, in the Washington, D.C. area, Maryland is usually thought of, suburban Maryland, as having the ritzier and more expensive high-dollar suburbs. So you'd think they'd be getting more concierge service for their vaccine, but they're having the troubles. Why? Because, well, the ritzy suburbs, I guess, aren't solidly Democratic enough to keep a Republican out of their state house. Anyway, distribution of vaccines to individual citizens, woefully inadequate, and the Trump team's unwillingness to enact a national testing plan. Another of the ways that we could have been New Zealand or South Korea, for that matter, or any of the other exemplars. Trump team's unwillingness to enact a national testing plan or even to clearly advocate for basic protective measures allowed the virus to run rampant, leading the U.S. to suffer more deaths than any other country on earth. Terrific that we have the science to develop these vaccines, but suppose we had been New Zealand on the response and warp speed on the vaccine. That would have been, what we would call good. And if you have the government do it, you would have good government. And then we'd all be safe. But we're not, because masks smear face makeup. So that's literally where we are. 500,000 going on 600,000 dead because the president didn't want anybody seeing his makeup get smeared. Which, why are you wearing makeup? But that's another question. For officials hoping to finally pivot from domestic to international vaccination strategy, there was another major catch reported here for the first time. That's why I'm crediting Vanity Fair. Maybe they're lying. I don't know. But they say it's reported here for the first time. And they reported it on April 6th, and I missed it. The contracts the Trump administration signed with the vaccine manufacturers prohibit the U.S. from sharing its surplus doses with the rest of the world. Oops. According to contract language Vanity Fair has obtained, the agreements with Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and Janssen, that's Johnson & Johnson. They're trying mightily over at Johnson & Johnson to rebrand the vaccine as a Janssen vaccine as opposed to Johnson & Johnson. But it's not working. But all right. So contracts with Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and Janssen state, quote, the government may not use or authorize the use of any products or materials provided under this project agreement unless such use occurs in the United States, unquote, or U.S. territories. Now, I don't know where the or U.S. territories comes from and why it's not inside the quotes. Maybe that's just an assumption, but I guess the actual text of the agreements ends at United States. So I don't know whether that means anything in particular or not, but that's, I don't know. Would we say that's surprising, or did we expect that to be the case? The clauses in question are designed to ensure that the manufacturers retain liability protection, but they have had the effect of projecting the Trump administration's America First agenda into the Biden era. That is what has completely and totally prohibited the U.S. from donating or reselling because it would be in breach of contract, said a senior administration official involved in the global planning effort. It is a complete and total ban. Those legal parameters must change before we do anything to help the rest of the world. So, I mean, it sounds pretty, I don't know. I guess you could say, I don't know if it sounds ironclad as contracts go, but it sounds like there's a pretty significant barrier there. Although then I think to myself, well, if Trump had inherited it and had inherited it from Obama, and I don't know, I guess if because he inherited it from Obama, then he would be, like ordinarily on his own, he would be inclined to say, no, we keep all the vaccines for ourselves. Just we keep everything for ourselves. That's the Trump way. But because Obama did it and the rest of the world would be clamoring for it, and particularly if like his friends Bolsonaro and Modi and Putin were clamoring for it, then Trump would be for the international distribution of these things. I mean, after all, when ventilators were the item everyone was scrambling for, he was still trading in ventilators. Instead of collecting every single one he could get his hands on, he was still shipping some of them overseas for various reasons. So, yeah, he would have violated that contract at the drop of a hat, and maybe it would even be the right thing to do. And as I think about it, I mean, if the concern is liability for protection for the companies, I don't know. So suppose the government breaks the contract. What's the penalty for breaking the contract, right? I mean, if Pfizer and Moderna and all these have this contract and they say you can't use this stuff outside the United States, and we say, sure, right, whatever. And we use it outside of the United States anyway. So they sue for breach of contract. But what are the damages that they seek? Is it money damages? Do we end up paying them? And I mean, if it's the United States government that's the defendant in the suit, there's all sorts of doctrine out there, and doctrine yet to be invented, if necessary, that would protect the government from incurring too much liability. But also, I mean, these contracts dumped an enormous amount of money into the laps of these companies. I'm not so sure that courts wouldn't also be able to find, what are your damages here? You got $1 bazillion for doing the work, and the mRNA research was already done. So really, you got a big payday. You got protection from liability inside the United States. Nothing we can do about protecting you from liability outside the jurisdiction of the United States. But the world has this pandemic. And Americans are safer if the rest of the world gets vaccinated too. And we're doing it. And I'm not certain that I don't know what a court would find with respect to a contract like that. And Trump would risk it, and maybe we ought to do it too. Or maybe the big delay, besides the logistics and other things, is the lawyers trying to figure out, are we going to be okay in this thing? This is taxpayer money. I guess if they sued the government and won, and we had to pay a settlement, we got to be responsible with the taxpayers' money. We can't necessarily figure that out in 10 minutes here. So we might have to delay things and figure out what's what. Or look for workarounds like vaccinating people at consulates or what have you. Anyway, where do we leave off here? In a statement to Vanity Fair, a Defense Department spokesperson acknowledged the contract restrictions, saying, DOD did attempt to negotiate terms that would allow the use of vaccine doses outside the U.S., but in some cases the vaccine manufacturers refused. Given the imperative to produce 300 million doses for the American public, said the spokesperson, Operation Warp Speed officials agreed that it was, quote, more important to contract with the vaccine manufacturers for doses that could be used, unquote, by U.S. citizens, open quotes again, then walk away from the negotiations based on this single term, close quotes. And that makes some sense, right? I mean, ultimately, look, we have 0 doses right now. We have to vaccinate 300 million Americans. All right, fine. You want liability protection? You got it. You want a bunch of money dumped in your lap? You got it. What else do you want? Okay, we don't use the vaccine outside of the United States? Fine. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But for now, we either start production or don't start production based on our agreement or non-agreement to this clause in the contract. Fine, we agree. However, I will say we've got to make great deals. And Mr. Great Deals, was basically at the mercy of the pharmaceutical companies. But he wanted to be, I'm sure. But, once again, Mr. Great Deals turns out to not be able to negotiate anything. No surprise there. The impasse is especially frustrating because the Biden team's global ambitions go beyond donating money or surplus vaccines. Vanity Fair has learned that the administration is quietly considering plans to have the U.S. serve as a major manufacturer of affordable, high-quality COVID vaccines for the entire world, a role typically reserved for lower-cost countries such as, here's some irony for you, India. And, unfortunately, all the people who work at the vaccine factories are sick, so they can't help. The effort began in plain sight on March 2nd, when the administration announced that under the Defense Production Act, Merck would, remember this, repurpose 2 of its U.S. manufacturing plants to begin producing the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It's the Janssen vaccine, for God's sake, say the PR people in the background. The partnership, pairing 2 traditional rivals, could yield as many as 1 billion doses a year, which would take care of part of India. So that would be nice. The immediate goal was to vastly increase America's supply, but the extra doses could also be used to supply the world, said a senior Biden official. Just connect the dots. There's a real ability for the U.S. to become a major supplier of COVID vaccines. The federal government began thinking through what to do with its surplus doses long before any vaccines were even approved. So that's good news, right? Even way back when, even under the Trump administration. At the end of last July, Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar, remember we hate those guys from the Trump administration. He convened a group to develop a strategy for global sharing. The U.S. Agency for International Development, which you may know as USAID, joined the effort, but the Defense Department, which negotiated the contracts with vaccine manufacturers, declined to engage. Now, they were headed by some extraordinarily rotten people at the time, but DOD, it says here, gave us the middle finger. A source involved in the effort said they literally would not attend meetings. A Defense Department spokesman said DOD and HHS have been working closely to determine how to handle excess doses since the beginning of Operation Warp Speed, but there appears to be a disagreement about that. The National Security Council's Resilience Directorate, which coordinated key aspects of the U.S. COVID response, stepped in to help guide the debate. In a series of meetings over September and October, an interagency group that included the State Department, the Defense Department, and divisions of the Health and Human Services Department, among others, assessed the array of obstacles that stood in the way of the U.S. helping the world, from FDA regulations and export laws to chain of custody issues. Questions abounded. Should the U.S. sell its surplus, donate its surplus, subsidize the cost of its surplus? What should we be doing? At the heart of the debate was a battle over an essential question: how to define the point at which the U.S. could donate its excess vaccine. Was it when the U.S. reached herd immunity? When enough vaccines for every eligible American were under contract to be produced? Or when 70% of the population was vaccinated? We kicked around a lot of indicators, said a former administration official who worked on the document. The one that became the most cut and dry was the quantity produced and the population vaccinated. That effort led to the creation of the Framework for International Access, which affirms that the U.S. intends to share its doses and will do so multilaterally. The document had 2 versions. one that came to roughly 4 pages, and a longer one, as well as a spreadsheet that assessed the needs of each country that might receive vaccines. Several countries were pointedly excluded from the list of prospective recipients, said the former administration official, due to their instability or human rights records. Any number of factors, I'm sure, could be worked into that. We'll continue with this because this is kind of fascinating and revealing. It's taking up a lot of our time, but it seems like an important issue. Then maybe move on after this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Putting myself to sleep here. By the way, relevant to current discussion is this comment from Brian Monroe that says the Biden administration has, this is interesting, quote unquote, loaned vaccines to Canada already and are loaning more, which is good because every once in a while Canada threatens to jump into one or another of my infamous top 10 lists on counts, but so far holding the line. Anyway, if the receiving country has a contract with the company, what's the issue? I don't know. We're trying to bore into it and see what issues might still remain. But yes, I did see that floated as a possibility yesterday when people were talking over, other ways to get vaccine distributed. That the idea would be we would loan vaccines to other countries. And, everybody puts it in scare quotes because it's a loan and I guess later be forgiven or it can't be repaid anyway, except with sending us more vaccine. And maybe by the time other countries are able to generate their own vaccine and quote unquote repay the loan, we might need those vaccines because we might be in another wave. Who knows? But, it's not the worst idea in the world. And, redefining your terms to redefine what you're able to do seems like as good a workaround as any here. Pardon me. Okay. Let me jump back to, I'm interested in this Vanity Fair issue, and we got some commentary going on during the break here about one of the concerns that the American officials raised was the exclusion of some countries from the list of prospective recipients for excess vaccine on the basis of their human rights record, and the irony of saying, well, where the people are suffering under a regime that won't respect their human rights and presumably also at the same time dying of coronavirus, we will not prevent any of them from dying from coronavirus by giving them vaccine, thereby compounding the misery of their human rights records there in that country. But, obviously part of the problem is if you give the vaccine to a government with a terrible human rights record, and some of their terrible human rights records has to do with stealing assets from the people they govern and diverting them elsewhere for private profit of the people inside the regime, that's a problem. So you end up with, sure, we should send them some excess vaccine because they're already suffering from human rights abuses, but then they'll just suffer from one more human rights abuse, which is their government taking away their vaccine, selling it to India, and pocketing the money, and they're still living in misery and unvaccinated, and we've given money away to this regime that does these things. Complications and nuance. But back to the article. In November, this document was cleared. Remember, the the framework for international access was cleared to be elevated to the National Security Council's Principals Committee. You can see how many levels of this process there are. We were told to prepare for a rollout, said the senior administration official. On January 5th, a 4-page version of the framework made it to the desk of Deputy National Security Advisor Matthew Pottinger. And remember, we're still in the Trump administration here. So, okay, the 4-page version makes it to the desk of the Deputy National Security Advisor in preparation for a meeting of the National Security Council's Principals Committee. But again, January 5th. Next day, insurrection against the United States government, yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that could cause a problem. But the next day, here it is. MAGA insurrectionists stormed the Capitol. By that afternoon, Pottinger had resigned. And, I'm sure at the time everybody was, actually probably everybody was like, too little, too late, resigning in the face of this thing. What have you been doing all along? But interesting. There were some people who would say, look, the only principled thing to do in the face of this insurrection is resign. And, and they mean it. And then someone would resign. You say, well, that doesn't turn that person into a good guy, but at least they had the integrity to resign. Unless, of course, you're Elaine Chao, in which case it's questionable. Why did you resign anyway? Probably something else. But you're going to point to the insurrection. And to the extent that people believe you, they'll say, good. I guess we never think about things like, well, what was on that guy's desk when he resigned? Maybe he was in position to actually do something good for a change. I mean, that's a stretch for Trump administration officials. But I guess here it was. Pottinger on his desk had the 4-page draft for this framework for international access and said, I can't, in good conscience go on anymore in this government insurrection. It sounds very dramatic, but it was an insurrection. He's right. But he didn't say, I'm resigning effective tomorrow because first I got to go back into the office and sign off on the framework for international access. And, who knows what we would have thought of it if he had said that. We would say, what the hell's the framework for international access? It's probably Trump stealing money anyway. But the next day, right? Oh, yes, right. I read this. The MAGA insurrectionists stormed the Capitol. Pottinger resigns. The framework's authors assumed that the document and the months of work that went into it were now dead. Great, right? Just another project sent to the buzzsaw, said the former senior administration official. Globally minded government officials braced for the fallout. We are preparing for extreme backlash from the world for not sharing, said the senior government official. When they say we're hoarding, we are. But the framework document lived on. Hooray! One of Biden's first memoranda, dated January 21st, that would be very early, directed the Secretaries of State and Health and Human Services to, quote, promptly deliver to the president a framework for donating surplus vaccines. And it appeared that the document was moving closer to Biden's desk until the meeting last Wednesday. And again, we're talking about March 31st. So they got it all together to get signed off on and be kicked up to the National Security Council on January 5th. Insurrection stops that. By the way, I mean, does anybody even want to give any consideration to the possibility that somewhere in the discussions were, well, should we have this insurrection or not? I don't know. I'm not sure what to do. Well, if you haven't made up your mind, based on all the other evidence that's been put before you, it will have the effect of killing our ability to clear the documentation necessary to share the vaccines internationally. Oh, good. Well, in that case, yeah, we should absolutely go for, probably didn't enter into their consideration, but anyway, I guess it could have. You never know. But yeah, one of the unforeseen consequences of, if you're going to decide to go ahead with an insurrection against the government of the United States and try to hang Mike Pence, I'm sure that particular kind of repercussion is just not on your mind, or good, fine, who cares? Screw the rest of the United States or screw the rest of the world. In fact, screw the U.S. because most of the people who are there for the insurrection probably didn't believe in the vaccine anyway and are part of the 45% telling pollsters they'll never get it. So another reason you can't let him get away with this thing. Should be hanging a lot more people for this, basically, is what this is telling me. The officials present at the White House meeting, that was the March 31st meeting, deadlocked over the next steps for the framework. Several attendees argued passionately that the document should be elevated immediately to the National Security Council's Principals Committee, comprising the president's top advisors and cabinet secretaries. Now, again, this is March 31st. That was almost ready to go on January 5th under the Trump administration. Those idiots, those clowns were ready to move that thing to the Principals Committee on January 5th, well, or 6th if there hadn't been an insurrection. The argument for doing so was obvious. The longer the virus proliferates around the globe, relatively unimpeded by vaccines, the more likely it is to mutate and spawn dangerous variants. The people who really live and breathe global health understood how dire it is, said the senior official, but those involved in the White House's domestic COVID-19 response apparently made clear to the group, now is not the time. Said the senior official with knowledge of the meeting, they've put the brakes on until someone higher can figure this out. That's too bad. I mean, I guess is there really no possibility of saying, well, you guys continue to work on international distribution things. You guys make a great point over here about now's not the time. We're going to have a national domestic crisis, another spike in coronavirus. After all, everybody who went to the insurrection is going to get sick and bring it home to their communities and spring break and everybody prematurely opening up. But you guys work on that and you guys work on this thing. I mean, this document was ready to go on January 5th. Even the idiots were able to write this thing. Now we have it in our possession. Why can't you finish it? 3 of you work on finishing it, and 22 of you work on the domestic problem. I don't know. But clearly the answer is it's complicated, and you don't know. You don't know what's going on and how many people are necessary to do this. You'd love to allocate your resources that way. It probably occurred to these guys that, well, maybe we could do two things at once. But I guess not. A series of scares in the early 2000s, we're now transitioning into a new section here, including the 2001 anthrax attacks on members of Congress. They're always getting attacked. And the press, Congress and the press, and the 2004 worldwide outbreak of H5N1 bird flu, right, prompted Congress to pass the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act. It's a cute little acronym, Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness, PrEP Act. The 2005 law gives manufacturers of vaccines and therapeutics developed in response to public health emergencies sweeping protection from liability and makes the U.S. government a guarantor of that protection. Okay, so they already had it, and I guess there was no need to negotiate it this time around for the coronavirus thing. But okay, the law provides an almost Star Trek level shields up, said Nicholas Pace, a senior social scientist at the Rand Corporation. But the moment that vial walks across the border, PrEP has no effect. The cross-border liability problem is a huge one. According to a briefing document prepared during the Trump administration for the National Security Council, a portion of which was obtained by Vanity Fair, this type of liability protection is unique in the world. Most other countries provide no protection at all, and only in some cases provide some level of legal protection. In the wake of such woebegone public health campaigns as the U.S. government's 1976 mass vaccination against swine flu, which led to numerous cases of paralysis from Guillain-Barré syndrome, I hope I've pronounced that even close to correctly, liability exposure has become the third rail for these companies, a senior Biden official acknowledged. They are not going to do business unless they're protected. Paul Mango, remember him? A Trump administration Operation Warp Speed official put it another way. If I am a vaccine manufacturing CEO, you're very wealthy, I'm sure, I did not sign up to do this so that I would be liable to Ethiopia. So he has to, of course, make it racist in some way. All right, sure, fine. Meanwhile, the CEO is getting paid $1 bazillion. But that's another story. And there really was another story over the weekend. Operation Warp Speed seemed to bend over backward to avoid that possibility, agreeing to a sweeping restriction that prevents the United States from sharing its bounty and thereby reaping any diplomatic rewards. Experts say the Trump administration, which, after all, was in the position of doling out billions of dollars in development funds, was not required by any law to roll over for the vaccine makers. Sam Halabi, a scholar at the O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law at Georgetown University, who is currently advising several international organizations involved in the global vaccination effort, said, "The U.S. has been in a very good position to call the manufacturers bluff. If you want the billions in procurement dollars, then we want the flexibility to send doses overseas. But U.S. negotiators likely didn't have any interest in sharing outside of U.S. territory." In other words, the deal was there to be made. The very great deal could have been done. But what do you know? The great deals guys didn't even seem to ask. But okay. And more importantly, probably, the people who were sent to negotiate this didn't care about anything but the United States. In some places, that's a good thing to do. And in others, global pandemic, probably a bad thing to do. But it feels like a Kushner thing. By contrast, during the H1N1 flu outbreak in 2009, a U.S. donation campaign was planned early and geographic restrictions were not imposed, said a former Obama administration official who had helped plan the H1N1 vaccine donations. Given that history, I am really surprised the U.S. would agree to constrain its options, said the official, after being read the contract language by Vanity Fair. The result of Operation Warp Speed's acquiescence is yet another manifestation of Trump's nativist America First agenda and his bad, negotiating skills. The contracts, said one Biden health advisor, reflect the whole ethos of the Trump administration. As to whether the Biden administration can overcome the Trump administration's contractual restrictions against sharing globally, a senior White House official told Vanity Fair, "I am confident that we will overcome any obstacles when we want to do something internationally." President Biden himself has made it clear that he intends to take a leadership role on the worldwide fight against COVID-19. On February 18th, he pledged $4 billion to COVAX, that's short for COVID-19 Vaccine Global Access Facility, a collaborative international effort working to buy COVID-19 vaccines in bulk and distribute them to the world's poorest countries. Biden's pledge makes the United States COVAX's biggest contributor, as it should be. The administration is walking the walk, said Gian Gandhi, UNICEF's COVAX coordinator for supply division. Meanwhile, a Quad alliance among Australia, India, Japan, and the U.S. is looking to boost COVID vaccine manufacturing in India, partly to counter China's push to distribute its own vaccine to the developing world. And then there is the Defense Production Act deal with Merck and Johnson & Johnson, which could lay the groundwork for an ambitious plan to make the U.S. a global supplier of COVID-19 vaccines. On Sunday, March 28th, the U.S. government took what appeared to be another small step toward that goal. A cargo plane touched down in Mexico City, bearing 1.5 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine that's being manufactured here, but has still not been approved by U.S. drug regulators. 10 days earlier, the Biden administration has announced plans to loan 4 million AstraZeneca doses to Mexico and, we heard it earlier, our own correspondent told us earlier, Canada. And this was the first installment. Before the doses could be shipped, the two countries had to negotiate separate contracts to indemnify AstraZeneca. That's part of our answer then. Even then, the use of the term loan was designed to end run the language in the original Warp Speed contract. What did Brian ask us here? If the receiving country has a contract with the company, what's the issue? Well, I don't know, but now they don't have that issue either because the receiving country, in the case of Canada and Mexico anyway, have agreed to negotiate separate indemnity contracts for AstraZeneca. Last Wednesday, when one attendee at the White House meeting referred to the AstraZeneca donation, Several people immediately piped up saying, "Don't use that word," said the senior official with knowledge of what transpired. If they used donate, sell, or share, it would be a breach of contract. The issue has made a whole bunch of government lawyers very nervous, said the official. We, the United States government, have never broken contracts of that nature. Though Trump would have tried, I'm sure. This is not like DOD canceling an order for a plane. White House officials point to the AstraZeneca, quote, loan as an example of how they were able to overcome contractual obstacles to help global partners. As we get increasing confidence that we have enough vaccine, we will explore options for sharing more broadly, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said in a briefing on March 22nd. Even with a vaccinated world seemingly close at hand, the international outlook remains grim. A deadly variant known as P1 is ravaging Brazil, leading to the collapse of that nation's health system and the digging of mass graves. France, which has managed to keep its schools open throughout the pandemic, just closed them amid fast-spreading variants and a lag in vaccinations. The AstraZeneca vaccine, which had promised to be a workhorse COVID inoculator for the developing world due to its low price point and normal refrigeration requirements, faces a crisis of confidence. Last week, Germany suspended its use for those under 60 due to numerous cases of, blood clots and some deaths that may be associated with its use. On Tuesday, a European Medicines Agency official said regulators now believe there is a definitive link. Meanwhile, even as Biden has moved mountains to secure America's COVID-19 vaccine supply, last week news broke that a manufacturing mix-up at a vaccine plant in Baltimore, now old news, had contaminated 15 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It's Johnson, damn it. Like I'm just imagining these guys in the background. Get that guy out of here. The doses, enough to inoculate a small country, had to be destroyed. Given these ongoing struggles, global sharing will continue to take a back seat. Hundreds of nations have now written to the U.S. government requesting American-made vaccines, said the senior government official. Sounds like Trump. They're calling me from all over. They all want the American vaccines, but they probably do. It's sad because we catalog all these requests, we answer them, but the answer is still no. Wow. So, all right, that gives us a sense of what nuance is at work here, and I guess it was worth the time, to veer away from generalized politics and spend time on this one, because it's on everybody's mind, and starting to get a better picture of what's going on. I was thinking about, I guess the other complications I was thinking about, there was the news over the weekend that Americans who are vaccinated, and I guess will have vaccine passports, whatever. That's how you'll prove it, right? If you're vaccinated, you can now plan a trip for the summer to the European Union. European Union will open its doors. And my next question is, so Brexit, I want to go to England, let's say. I mean, I don't. I'd go if there was something to do. I have no plans to go. But can you go? Because, I imagine they would open their doors too. They're not opposed to doing what the EU also does for their own reasons. But I guess they've got to open their doors on their own now that they've Brexited. And I wonder if they will. They'll be under pressure to do so, certainly, to keep up with their European neighbors. And while I'm on the subject of Europe, I guess I'll also throw this warning out there. My nightly compilation of all the numbers kind of saw the India problem coming. I don't think it was like any kind of prediction or anything. It was just, I'm just reading what the numbers say. And probably a few days before the rest of us started reading in the press, because they have to, they learn these things at the same time, I guess, that I do, but they write them for tomorrow. So we beat them to press by just reading the numbers out loud, that India was experiencing this spike. Turkey, also, I called out a couple of days after that. Nobody seems to have been paying any attention to what's happening there, and I think they too continue by population, normalized by population. They're experiencing a spike that was really just as bad as what India was experiencing, but India has 1.4 billion people to experience it with. But Turkey remains at the top of the lists every day in their total cases by population, and their spike is, comparable. to what was going on in India. So keep an eye on them. Also, other weird indicators in deaths per million. I think I may have mentioned this on Friday. Eastern Europe, there's a band across like Central Eastern Europe, like from north to south. Poland, it's really like Baltic to the Balkans. There's this band of countries where the deaths per million in population is enormous, world leading. I would say, I think I counted up, but 6 or 7 of the top 10 countries, jurisdictions in the world in terms of deaths per million are Eastern and Central European. There's that band across from the Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania, to Poland, to Czechia, to Slovakia, to Hungary and Romania, and just all the smaller states in between, and all the way down to the Adriatic, so that the front on the other side, the Western Europe front, Germany, Austria, and Italy, cut off this line. So you can see why they too are hard hit. But I guess where they've been more able to develop and or distribute vaccines, to the east, it's just not the case. And the deaths are mounting, and we're not paying a great deal of attention to it. All right, I'll close things out here by taking a look at what Greg sent us from the White House COVID response team, because there was a thread attached to that. This was Tim Manning explaining how we're using the Defense Production Act for global response. And he starts this way. How nice. With an introduction. Hi, Twitter. I'm Tim Manning, the White House COVID-19 supply coordinator. There's been a lot of confusion around the use of the Defense Production Act as it relates to the global supply chain for COVID-19 treatment. Let me try and break this down as simply as possible across 8 tweets. We'll see if we can fit them in. To set the stage, the world has embarked on an unprecedented and historic vaccination production effort. In an average year, the world producers put out about 4 billion vaccines for all sorts of things, from flu to the measles, etc. This year, the world is working to make nearly 14 billion COVID-19 vaccines, in addition to those other 4 billion that they usually make. This is hard work, and it's encouraging to see the progress the world is making, but making vaccines requires specialized materials, and there's just not enough of them. Another major nuance and logistical problem. To make vaccine here in the U.S., we have used the Defense Production Act to ensure we have access to all the needed supplies with many U.S. companies. DPA in these cases just means U.S. companies must prioritize their government contracts ahead of other orders. It doesn't mean an export ban. DPA doesn't even mean a de facto ban. Companies are able to export. In fact, companies that supply our vaccine manufacturing export their products all across the world. We're just one client of the raw material companies. It also doesn't create the shortages. There's just more global manufacturing happening everywhere than suppliers can support. Now, here's what we did yesterday. We diverted our pending orders of vaccine filters to India's vaccine manufacturing effort. This will help India to make more vaccine, and it's only one effort among many to help their COVID-19 response, including therapeutics, PPE, oxygen, etc. A big part of my job, Manning says, is understanding the complexities of our global supply chain. I think I'd be interested in that job. I monitor this every day. There are challenges, of course, but our response will always work to find ways to address them. We'll continue to stand ready to help with the COVID-19 response. Okay, well, I mean, it's nice to hear from them. And there were a couple of good points made, but it doesn't answer a whole lot of questions. Not as detailed as Vanity Fair, but then it was only 8 tweets. It wasn't a whole article. I think between the two of them, though, we got a pretty good picture of some of the complications that stand in the way of just doing it, I guess. And I guess I hearken back to an earlier logistical barrier. If you are making, 14 billion COVID-19 vaccines plus the 4 billion other vaccines you're making, eventually you run out of those little bottles. No, seriously. I mean, you're going to run out of those little glass vials, and whatever the hell you're making it out of, I mean, I guess the raw material might be abundant, but somewhere there's a bottleneck in producing bottlenecks, I guess, actually, right? So technically, That's what's happening. Anyway, very informative, I thought. There's a million other stories that we didn't get to from the weekend. Most of them much more clearly domestically political. We'll definitely cover some of those. Tomorrow's Tuesday, but I think Joan she's out beginning this week. I think so, right? All right. Well, okay, that gives us an extra hour to read through, or half hour to read through more of the stories. And then we'll pretend we'll imagine her response in our heads. I don't think I can do a Joan imitation. But if I had a producer or some audio technical magicians, we could probably piece together some answers from her tape of previous appearances and make a Howard Stern show routine out of it. But no, alas, we cannot. But instead, we'll come back and entertain you tomorrow. My promise to you, as always. But first, of course, Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy.
Radio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, lots of room for justice to operate. Nothing that we overstated, right? Let's see, what do we got? Joe Manchin insists he's not a roadblock as he blocks the road to Biden's infrastructure plan for roads, bridges, and more. How ironic. Those stories and much, much more from around the country and around the world. Next, do stay tuned.